C'est-à-dire qu'on a donné à un photographe classique, portraitiste, un prix qui concerne un artiste d'art contemporain. Il y avait cette année-là à Venise des artistes contemporains africains, et c'est ce post-colonialisme qui est toujours un peu larvé. On donne, parce que c'est les images synthétiques, on donne à Malik Sidibé l'image et ensuite on le montre partout au Japon et on dit c'est notre africain.
Well, Frederique is to say that really, though there were many African contemporary photographers at the 2007 Biennale in Venice, they chose to give the prize to Sibide, who is just really a classic portrait artist. And to some extent, Frederick feels that we kind of have this way of labelling African photographers, our African photographer.
Et donc, voilà, ça c'était peut-être pour vous dire que ce monsieur est pour moi, il me touche beaucoup parce que c'est vraiment, je pense, c'est un œil, qu'il avait une grande sensibilité. C'est des images modestes et fortes, et c'est aussi des documents aujourd'hui qui nous parlent d'une certaine région du monde qu'on ne connaît pas. Mais il nous en parle, et ça n'est pas l'ethnographisme, c'est de la photographie.
What Oumar Ly brings to the table is that not only does he take beautiful pictures and pictures that are very interesting, but also he's able, through his own eyes, to represent a certain story. There's a story behind all of these pictures in particular, and that's why they're so interesting.
Et c'est donc quand j'ai décidé de faire le livre, je me suis aussi du coup posé la question de comment on montre les images africaines. Donc là, peut-être qu'il y aura un livre là que je poserai pour complètement.
This is the book that Frederick put together, Oumar Ly's photos.
Et la question, c'était ces documents, cette découverte d'une collection, comment on la montre et comment justement ne pas tomber dans l'exotisme. Donc j'ai décidé d'avoir le parti pris de mettre toutes les photos au même niveau, avec juste chaque photo sur une page, comme un album de famille en fait.
What Frederique did is that she just very simply put the photos, all of the photos, in equal formats, one on each page, and she's organised it like a family album, really. Et donc, il a été pour la première fois présenté en dehors de son pays à Bamako en décembre dernier. Et donc, je vous montre juste la dernière image pour fermer la boucle. He was presented for the first time at the Bamako exposition, and the next photo that she's going to show you sort of closes the presentation.
Voilà, donc c'est là où Martine Parr rencontre Oumar Ly et regarde le livre, et c'est comme ça que l'envie est née de le faire venir ici.
It was at Bamako that Martine Parr, who is the organizer of today's Biennale, met Oumar Ly, and that's them together in this photo.
Et donc là, c'est Oumar Ly à l'ambassade de France avec le fond qui est dans le parc. Et voilà, il n'est pas là. C'est la seule chose que je peux dire.
This is Oumar Ly at the French embassy, but he's not here today, and that's all she can really say.
Voilà.
My name is Suzanne Opton. I'm very happy to be here. I want to thank Martin and the people at the Biennale for inviting me to show this work, this soldier work. This is two parts of what I call soldier. The many wars work has never been shown before, so I'm delighted to see it on the walls. At the beginning of the war, the American invasion of Iraq, I was concerned, and I had a son who was of draft age, and I thought if he were drafted, how would he survive a war experience and go back to his life? I didn't know anybody who was in the volunteer American Army, so I called many army bases. I wanted to do portraits of soldiers. I called military bases all around the country, and they all blew me off, and except then all you really need is one, and I called somebody at Fort Drum, and they said, is it political? At this time, the war was very popular in America. They said, is it political? I said, no, it's just art, just portraits of soldiers. So they said, well, come, and when do you want to come, and how many people do you want to photograph? I said, oh, okay, I'll come for 4 days, and I'll photograph 10 people a day. Then I thought, well, you know, how am I going to do this? I wanted to figure out exactly what I would do before I went there, because I thought otherwise they might Google me and throw me off the base. I'd never been to an Army base before. So I set up 2 4x5 camera setups, and I photographed each soldier who the military handler supplied me with, everybody who came. I photographed them standing in a sort of head and shoulders traditional pose, which was a way of getting to know them, and also something that I could give them, a print that I could give them. And then I said, come over here and put your head on the table. And they did that. So the initial standing pictures were black and white, very traditional, as I say, and these were color, but also with black and white Polaroid at the time, so that the people saw the picture that I was doing. But when we did these pictures, which are lit with a strobe, with several lights, in kind of classical portrait tradition, I didn't talk to them. I just said, put your head down. They were stuck in this very awkward position. If they moved, I'd have to start all over again and focusing and adjusting the camera. So they were stuck there, and it took a while before I could take the picture, to adjust the camera to take the picture. And during that time, often I had the dark cloth over my head so they didn't see me, and the idea was that their mind would wander to wherever, that I would disappear. And I think that what I wanted to do was take a vulnerable picture of a soldier. I thought that when we see soldiers on television, they're encumbered with all kinds of gear, and we don't have any idea who they are, whose brother, father, son they might be. And they're always shown as heroic, so I wanted to show the opposite of that, because as a parent I thought certainly they may be heroic, but they're also, one false move and they could be blown away. And so asking them to put their heads down, I thought is kind of asking a performance of them. And that, so they put their heads down, and then they've done their job. They can retreat to wherever their thoughts might bring them. When the pictures are displayed, they're generally displayed very large, and so that the head looks like the head of a fallen statue of Stalin or Saddam or the American soldier. So when it says, in the titles of these pictures are the number of days in harm's way, all of these people had served in Iraq, Afghanistan. I asked for volunteers who had recently come back, but they would all go again, because in the American military people go, they're not, medically released, or they're not wounded or killed. They go back again and again, sometimes 4 or 5 times. So these people were between tours of duty, which I think is significant to the image, because they've been there. We see whatever we see on their faces of having been there, but they will go again. So if I asked them, what do you think of this picture, they wouldn't. I wrote to one guy, I said, what did you think of the pictures? He said, well, we thought the poses were kind of funny, and we didn't know where you were going with the color, or vice versa. And I thought, well, is that all? I didn't reach you any more than that? But then, as a Vietnam veteran in the audience, when I mentioned this, said to me, he said, well, they're still being soldiers. Give them 10 years to think about what they've lost of their lives, to grieve about their experience, and then show them the photo, and it will have a different meaning to them. So as still being soldiers and potentially going back to war, they probably couldn't think of the meaning of this picture, and yet when I asked them to put their heads down, I think, although I didn't explain it to them, I'm sure that it resonated with them, because I think soldiers think about dying all the time. And I think that the power of these pictures is because it looks like they're fallen, and yet they're very much alive, and the pictures are kind of tender. some of them, and that they, as I said, I didn't talk to them when I did the pictures, but what I did do was say, look at the camera, look away, or sometimes close your eyes. So those were the only directions given to the soldiers. So it does have to do with performance. My background is related to performance art, and it does have to do with the sort of sculptural aspect of the head just becoming an object in and of itself, sort of laying there. This man, Kane Claxton, was we always had a handler with us. This man was our first handler. He was a public affairs officer with the military, and he watched us photograph for several days, one person after another. Then he got his hair cut for the picture and put his head down in a particular way. And he was very, very interesting, because I think generally the public doesn't hear from public affairs officers from the military who talk candidly about the view of the military in the press and in the public. And in America, the war was, and to some extent still is, kind of a hidden event. We are at war in America, but the cost of war is borne by individual families from small towns, kids who sit in the back of the classroom and don't have a plan when they graduate from high school, and then the recruiter comes by and they're vulnerable to that. They don't have money to go to college. They're stuck in this little town where there's not much to do. So the military is an opportunity, and it's sold as an opportunity. It's also sold, I think, as a glamorous, with a certain amount of glamour, which is why I chose to do these pictures with a lot of color as sort of a nod to the glamour of the military. So after I did these pictures, the first show that I had of these photos was in Syracuse, just 30 miles from the base where the pictures were shown. And what we did was we made billboards. Because I wanted to, I thought that since these pictures, they're conceptual work that's grounded in documentary imagery, but I felt that documentary imagery of a war doesn't have an impact any longer. I mean, we sort of don't look at it, or I don't look at it. And what I wanted to do was see the individual soldier and consider his situation in a sort of conceptual way. And so I wanted to take the imagery outside of the art context, and since it was a public issue, which mostly was not seen, I made billboards, and later I made billboards in 9 American cities.